change that. Good morning, good morning. So Hilchot Kashrut, but we're doing some halachot that are really completing the cycle of matnot kuna, the 24 gifts that we have separate to give to the Kohen. We spoke about the Zerah, Chaim, and Keva, and yesterday we spoke about the Bechor, which we avoid nowadays pretty much by selling the birthing mother or part of the birthing mother, her ear or her windpipe, something that is essentially essential to the animal has to be sold to a non-Jew, and then the baby born is not kadosh, is not holy as the firstborn, because if it was holy as the firstborn, we'd have trouble handling it. It would have to be really put in a glass box so nothing happens to it. We can't cause it to have a blemish. We can't bring it as a korban in the temple. The Kohen can't bring it as a korban. So we don't give it to the Kohen because it'll just be onerous upon him to take care of it. And usually we avoid the mitzvah altogether. There's one other type of bechor which we didn't mention yesterday. Yeah.
Pidyon Habed, mother's Jewish, father's not. Do you still do a Pidyon Habed first birth?
I believe so, yeah. The mother, it goes by the mother, yeah. The opening of the womb.
The baby is half.
Maybe it's called Jewish.
That's true.
Yeah, I think there is a mitzvah. So there is a strange mitzvah in the Torah. I mean, this whole thing might be strange because we're not cattle farmers. But when people did have, people that are farmers have babies born, and the firstborn is holy, just like we're used to it in the firstborn baby, human baby. There's a strange sort of unique feature of the Bechor, and that is we said yesterday, the Bechor only applies to kosher animals. Not only kosher animals which were used as a sacrifice, which could be brought as a sacrifice in the temple. So it's only oxen and sheep and goats. Whereas the Torah says there's one other animal. And it happens to be a non-kosher animal. Not all the non-kosher animals. Only the chamor. Only the chamor.
Is it? I'm getting checked tomorrow. I'm gonna sit here. I'm getting checked.
Plenty of room. Why was the chamor singled out? So the Torah doesn't say why, but it does say that the firstborn of the donkey also what? It can't be given to the Kohen to be brought on the altar. We don't bring sacrifices from donkeys, and nobody can eat it. It's not kosher. So what's similar? It has to be given to the Kohen. But the Torah already says that since the Kohen is not going to be able to bring it as a sacrifice, it's not going to be able to, it doesn't really have holiness. And the Torah says, if you want, you can leave it and give it to the Kohen, but it won't be useful to anybody. And therefore the Torah says you should redeem it. Redeem it, like we know with redeeming the firstborn human child, you redeem the firstborn donkey to the mother. You can really, the Torah says you should redeem it with a sheep, but oral Torah tells us it doesn't have to be a sheep. You can redeem it with anything. You redeem it with, the trick is that you have to have something the same value. If you redeem it with a sheep, it doesn't have to be the same value. So if your donkey is worth $1,000, and you can redeem it with a sheep that's worth $100, no problem. But if you don't want to use a sheep and you want to redeem it with cash, or you want it with something else, it has to be worth $1,000. You have to give that to a Kohen. It's rarely done nowadays because we're not farmers. But if you are a farmer and we don't really raise, even if you're a farmer who raises donkeys, but if you happen to own a donkey and it has happened to give birth to a firstborn baby donkey, then you're lucky to be able to do this mitzvah. You say a bracha. Usually, because it's so rare, they make a big party about it. They make a public event. They invite people. I don't know if anybody been to one?
It's so rare to have a firstborn donkey.
Yes, of quite rare. Yeah, for a Jew, that owns donkeys at all was very rare, and for to
That's
own
why
a
it's
donkey,
brilliant to have a farm.
cool.
Own animals and.
Well, you can do this mitzvah. This is and usually you bring a great big rabbi, because they're excited to do this mitzvah. It's one of the 613. We don't usually get to do all of them. And you bring a kohen there, and you hold you see the great rabbi who, on behalf of the owner, is holding the sheep. Yeah. And he's holding the sheep. He makes Baruch Hashem, Peter Chamor, to redeem firstborn donkey, and he gives the sheep to the kohen. And with that, that's the end of the story. The only question that remains for us to discuss is why.
Why the donkey?
Why the donkey?
Two things.
Why the
I'm
donkey?
thinking the pasuk, where Abraham rose early and he saddled his donkey. Is it the same
Good.
word?
It's the same donkey. Good. Well, actually, it says aton, but it is also it's just a female
The one
donkey.
that Bilam rides on.
Also, Bilam rides a donkey. Who else? Where else do we find donkeys? That's a good way to start thinking about it. Where? No, in the Bible we're talking about. So we saw Abraham and Bilam. Who else rides a donkey? Who else talks? There's a lot of talk about the donkeys of the brothers of Yosef. They say, oh, this guy's out to get us and to take away our donkeys.
Oh, Moshe, didn't he like get, or was that camels at the well? Was that donkeys or camels?
Those were things.
There's a person that say that
Moshe? I don't think there's.
Yitro.
Yeah, and Yitro, what about him?
Or the 7 daughters of Yitro.
He saves they were feeding their flock. Their flock, I assume Moshe. I
Oh.
don't think it says anything about camels or donkeys. Oh, Moshe.
the Mashiach will come.
Good. There's a tradition that Mashiach will come riding on a donkey. So,
Is that literal or figurative? Or we don't know?
we don't know.
But I'm thinking
Anything
it's,
about the future we don't.
rather than redeeming it, though, a donkey is a very practical thing for the Kohanim because they've got to haul wood, they've got to haul water, they've got all these things. That it's like giving a farmer a pickup truck. I mean,
That's right. It could
it's
be.
not like, well, what am I going to do with this restaurant? It's like, okay, you know,
Yeah, it
it's a
could
very
be.
practical thing to give to a Kohen in the temple.
Right. It could be. Could be that that was the idea.
Those fires didn't burn by themselves, and there's not exactly a local supply.
The
of
Kohen
wood.
is allowed to use the donkey if you want to give it to him and not do this, replacing it with the sheep. But could be that was part of the idea to give the Kohanim some tools. Yeah. Someone else wanted to speak here?
Just curiosity. The symbol of one symbol of Cyprus is a donkey.
Also, Issachar, one of the 12 tribes, each one of them had a flag and they had a symbol, and because of the bracha of Yaakov to Issachar, Chamor Garin. One of the tribes is compared to a donkey. So donkey has a place of prominence. It's still curious. The best explanation that I know of, and again, we don't really know the explanation, but I think it comes from the knowledge of the Hebrew language. The word Chamor is the same letters as Chomer. Chomer meaning materialism, matter. Matter is Chomer. And of all of the animal kingdom, some of them are, kosher animals that could be brought onto the altar. The Chamor is sort of like the anti. It's like the lowest of the animal kingdom. It's the lowest of the beasts, which it's not kosher, and you can't eat it, and you can't bring a sacrifice from it. The Torah wants to say, specifically, even that low level of an animal, of the animal kingdom, even that low-level animal can be in service of God. And in particular, when we speak about what does it mean to be in service of God, we talk about spiritual life, we talk about spirituality, we talk about learning Torah, doing mitzvot, knowing God, connecting to the life of the Spirit, and all of a sudden we have
spiritual into the.
That's it. We can bring it down into the material to infuse our goal. It's a famous clip of Rav Kook, right? Hadash, Hayashan Yitchadesh, Hadash Yitkadesh. We want to try to bring spirituality even to the lowest parts of our reality, of our life. And maybe the donkey of Mashiach has something to do with that. Somehow that And I mentioned Rav Kook in particular because he was famous for his support of the secular Zionists because they were building the land. They were building the land physically, material. They were, building farms, and they were the ones that were paving the streets and really dealing with the material redemption of the Jewish people coming back to their land and building all the things that a regular nation needs. Material things like a police force and infrastructure
Military.
and the military and all those. Rav Kook was very excited about it because they're Jewish and they're rebuilding the Jewish sovereignty in the land. That is a holy endeavor, even though ultimately the goal of the material is to support. Right? Mashiach is riding on the donkey. He's not the donkey. Right? Don't make the mistake and think that the donkey is Mashiach. So don't think that secular Zionism is our end game here, but it's supposed to support. The material world is our springboard. It's the from which we can reach the higher heights of connection to spirituality, and perhaps that's one explanation of why the Torah has this unique mitzvah about the firstborn donkey and its redemption. Yes.
I think, in the Tiul with Madrid, with guy tour in Old City, and I don't remember the details, but they say like in the history that if you enter in the city with a horse, you're declaring a war.
Wow.
And when you enter with a donkey, you bring peace. So it was related to that, like
Yeah.
with the,
Yeah, we're not sure of all the symbolism of donkeys, what they meant in ancient cultures. Could be that there was, there's more to it. I'm sure there's more to it than what we just said, but we'll leave it at that. Let's move on to the next mitzvah. There's only two left. The one that we're going to discuss today is Maaser Behema. Maaser Behema is interesting. Most folks can understand that it's more similar to Maaser Sheni than it is to Bechor, even though you're taking an animal. Here again, it's only kosher animals. We're back to the kosher animals, the ones from which you could bring a korban. Because here, you're not giving it to the Kohen. It's not matnot kahuna. It belongs your own. The owner of the farm has to take 1 out of every 10 animals. Maaser, from the word eser. Like the Maaser Sheni of his produce, he has to take it to Jerusalem, and there, if it doesn't have a blemish, he brings it as a sacrifice. The owner himself brings it as a sacrifice. He eats, of course, part of the animal goes onto the altar, but the rest of it he eats, and he can give it to whoever he wants, to his children and to the poor people and to the Leviim, whoever's there. So 1 out of every 10 animals is like Maaser Sheni. It's the closest thing we have to Maaser Sheni. If we go back, who remembers Maaser Sheni? It was in every, what year was it? Every year, what years did we have Maaser Sheni?
3rd and 6th.
2 and 3.
The opposite.
Oh,
3rd and 6th was Maaser Ani.
1, 2,
So it's
4,
1, 2,
5.
4, and 5. 1, 2 a year out of the Shemitah cycle. Again, 1, 2 year 1, 2, 4, and 5. We had the second tithe, the second 10th that you would take up to Jerusalem, and we said that was a little bit to connect you to Jerusalem, to connect you and your family to Jerusalem. Maybe you'd send your son to Jerusalem to be able to, and you wouldn't have to. You'd pay less tuition because you would be giving him his food. He'd be able to eat while he's learning in yeshiva. He'd be able to eat from the Maaser Behema of your own, on the Maaser Sheni fruits that he has, or the monies that he can then go to the store and buy some fruits to eat. So it's definitely connecting all the Jewish people to the central place of worship, to where the temple was. And the law of Maaser Behema, we're going to get into some of the details, but the basic principle is every Jew, whether you're in Israel or outside of Israel, if you have 10 sheep, it's a yearly count over the course of the year. The Torah says explicitly that it should be brought year by year. So every year you have to make a count of how many animals you own, and a tenth of them of if you have 10 newborn sheep or 10 newborn goats, one of them has to be chosen and taken to the Beit HaMikdash and brought as a sacrifice. Now, if there's no Beit HaMikdash, obviously you can't. But still, one of the 10 has to be, you have to do something special with it. What do we do if we can't take it to the temple? What happens if the 10th one, in a second I'll explain to you how we count, how we choose. It's coming.
not, you don't have to choose it, that's, okay.
We'll get to it, how it gets chosen. But the 10th of, let's say you had 100 new sheep being born, so you would be taking 10 sheep to the Beit HaMikdash. Now, if they have a blemish, so then you don't have to sacrifice it. You get to eat it. You get to have it as your own. And this sounds like it's the
You still
mitzvah.
have to eat it in Jerusalem.
If it has a blemish, then you're not going to be bringing it as a sacrifice, and so I think you don't have to bring it. Yeah, you eat it at home. Yeah. Now there was a time. Now the halacha seems to say here that once the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, the rabbi said, "Don't do this mitzvah." David is going to yell at me and says, "How can you not do a mitzvah? The Torah says to do it." And you said, "It's different. How's this different than Bechor? Mitzvah Bechor, we just said, you have to find some mechanism. You have to sell it to a non-Jew. Non-Jew's animal, of course, doesn't become holy. But here, how come the rabbis just say, don't do that? Don't separate off the tenth?" Answer is that's exactly the difference. That the Bechor, the firstborn, is born holy from the womb. It's like God declares it holy automatically. And so, unless you use a non-Jew, that animal that's born is going to be holy, and you can't void the mitzvah. You can't just say the mitzvah doesn't apply. But in this mitzvah, the mitzvah is to separate off the 10th animal, as we're going to talk about presently, exactly how it's done. The process, you have to go through the process and choose the 10th out of, or if there's 20, so there'll be 2 animals that you choose. If there's 30, there'll be 3 animals that you choose. But you have to separate off the 1/10 of your animals and declare them, this one is maaser. And if you don't do that, well then, none of them become special, and you haven't done the mitzvah, but since there's not much you can do with it anyways, because there's no temple, why do it at all? And so the rabbis mandated, essentially, or they directed us, don't do this. And there is such a concept where the rabbis can tell you not to do a mitzvah. You can refrain from doing a mitzvah.
Something else.
We've seen this, it's common to us. When Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbat, they tell you don't blow the shofar. Right? How can they do that? Rabbis have the power to do that. B'shev, the altas, it's called when you sit and you not to do a mitzvah, that they can tell you when it's relevant. That's the way most people assume it's done. But in the day when it was done, there's a reason why not to do it also, because if you do declare the animals to be ma'aser, then maybe you'll declare it to be ma'aser, and then you'll shecht it and you'll eat it. You're not allowed to shecht it outside the temple. You have to take it to Jerusalem. It's an Isser Kares. It's like making a sacrifice outside the temple is a biblical prohibition. So it's a safeguard. So we don't want you to have an animal here which you might be violating it's punishable by excision. It's a really serious violation. And if it does get a blemish, you're still not allowed to use it for like shearing its wool, or to use it as a piece of burden. And so you're allowed to eat it, but you're not allowed to use it. So it could be that if you have this animal that you declare it as maaser, you'll be abusing it and not keeping its holiness. And so they just said best not to. If you had 10 head and you chose one and said this is the 10th, and you marked it, and we'll tell you exactly how it used to be done, then most can assume that it still has the status of Maaser Behema, and you have to let it die peacefully. You're not allowed to blemish it. You're not allowed to do anything to it. You can't have any benefit from it but the directive is don't declare any of the animals Maaser, and then None of them will be forbidden for you in any way. Yes, Malti, and I'll take a few questions, then I'll tell you a story about how they used to choose them. There's no pidyon. The Torah doesn't say pidyon about maaser. It says it about bechor. Only bechor chamor. Only the firstborn, and of course humans. The firstborn human child has redemption, and the firstborn donkey has redemption.
But they learn about the master
Sheni does.
That is possible.
Yes, but not this.
In this
Not
case,
Maser Beima, no. No, there's no pidyon of Maser Beima. Another question, yeah? David, you want to, okay. It's an amazing thing. This is, now, as I said, it has to be once a year, a yearly count, because you can't let it go past a year without separating out.
When-
The rabbi said, better to do it 3 times a year. Why 3 times a year?
Each holiday.
Good. And they said you should do it 15 days before the holiday. Why?
Wow.
Why? You're supposed to go into the Beit HaMikdash on the holiday, and they wanted to make sure that everybody has enough animals for taking up to the Beit HaMikdash. So if you have to separate it anyways, might as well do it right before the holidays and bring up those animals so that you can use them as your holiday sacrifices.
It also minimizes the chance of a mistake.
Also,
Because
sure.
if you do it 2 months and then 2 months before, there's 2 months that you could accidentally
That's
do
correct.
something wrong.
That's
Whereas
correct.
if you do it right before you go up,
Right. So there's 15 days before each festival. This was like
could
a
it be
cutoff
less than
time.
that? Because I'd imagine that the.
It could be any time of the year you
Because I
want.
mean, I imagine
really.
the ideal situation would be, hey, we're heading up to Jerusalem tomorrow, line up the sheep.
Yes, you could. Okay, so what do? You
Then
don't
they'll
line them
save
up.
it for that.
Once you declare it as the 10th animal,
Yeah.
you have to take it to the Beit HaMikdash. If there's no blemish, bring it as a sacrifice and have a party. And if there is a blemish, so then you can eat it at home. You don't have to take it to the Beit HaMikdash. But the ceremony was as follows: the Torah is you put all the animals into a corral, and you open up a small doorway where only one can get out at a time. And you take their mothers of these young sheep or goats, and you put them outside. And so they're calling each other, and they want to go to mommy. They want to go to mommy, so they're going to want to come out. So they come out, and they're forced to go out one at a time through the small, narrow gate. And when they go out, you count them. So you have a stick or some kind of staff in your hand and the end of it, it has some paint. And the further you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and the 10th one that comes out, you paint it with a mark, maybe an X, maybe I don't know, whatever the mark is, and that one you're declaring as this one is the 10th. Now, if you get lucky, the 10th one has a blemish on it. It has a broken leg, it has an ear that fell off, and so it's not kosher for the temple, and you get to eat it at home. You don't have to take it all the way to Jerusalem and eat it, and you don't have to bring it as a sacrifice. You get more of the meat yourself, but there's no way of knowing because you have to let them come out, single file, whichever one. And if you have 20 sheep, so you keep counting, 11, 12, 13, 14, the one that's number 20, the one that's number 20, and if you have 25 sheep, you do the same process, and number 10 that comes out, number 20 that comes out gets marked, and that's the one that's Maaser Beima. And
what? If you have 25, how do you keep counting?
so those 4 that after the 20th, you only have to take off 2.
Oh, but you count them all.
You count them all. Those extra 5, it's like they were already counted. And so then when the next year comes around, there's a machloket. Some people say that those 5 already kosherized because they were part of the group, and some say no, if they were not out of they're part of the next count. Some people say the next count. It's a machlok. In any case, this process of having the sheep or the goats go through this narrow opening, putting them all in the corral and then counting them, this became a metaphor, which is famously used in our Rosh Hashanah davening, right? What's the prayer? That God looks at all of the people of the world and He gives them a reckoning, takes the account, and it says Ro'eh edro. God is like a shepherd who's shepherding the sheep. Ma'avir tzono tachat shivto. he takes his flock and he puts them underneath his rod. Kain ta'avor
Yeah.
v'tispor v'timne nefesh kol chai. So to God, you two are counting each and every one of the people. Every living thing gets counted by God, and this is apparently was a well-known concept of, it's sort of like an ancient form of tax. You can imagine that the tax man comes and counts out with you how much you have, and everything has to be. It's sort of like what do we have at the end? Inventory. You have inventory. You count all the pieces that you have. So this was an inventory which was part of the mitzvah, and it's used as a metaphor for God. Each and every soul gets accounted for, gets treated, gets judged. Talking about the Day of Judgment on Rosh Hashanah, and this is the metaphor based on this mitzvah. Yeah.
Could we use, if the temple were there today, obviously, but could we use a mechanism similar to Truma and with the Ani?
I don't think
A
so.
similar thing, like in other words,
You can choose.
Can we loan the Beit HaMikdash $10,000, and then we count our sheep? Okay, and now so 3 sheep came out. I'm going to redeem them against the loan. I'm going to cancel $3,000 worth of the loan to the Beit HaMikdash. Could we do a mechanism similar to that?
Not at all. Not at all.
Not at
Because
all.
the Torah says that the 10th animal that gets chosen, there's this choosing process, and the 10th animal that gets defined as the 10th, you have to bring it to the Beit HaMikdash. And there's no redemption, as Malti said. So it's like Maaser Sheni, that once you separate it off, it has to be brought to Jerusalem. That object, that physical animal in this case, if it's pure, if it's not blemished, it has to be brought as a sacrifice. You can't switch it out with anything. Okay, so there's no. It's not just a question of value.
I remember you said that you can't puzzle it directly. But what if a minor child does it? So your 12-year-old takes some bread and ties it to their ears.
Right. So here, there I think by Bechor, there was a fine. The rabbi said you have to bring a witness. I think we mentioned this yesterday, that if you come and say, "Oh, look, my Bechor has a blemish," and the Kohen, it doesn't have to be brought as a sacrifice, and therefore it doesn't have any holiness anymore. They didn't put and they put a fine that you have to, because Kohanim would want to cheat because they didn't want to take care of it for so long, and so they said you have to have a witness that the blemish happened naturally. Here we don't find that, because the question is why. Apparently there was less of a motivation. First of all, there's a chance that the 10th one that happens to come out that gets marked, it could be it has a blemish. And theoretically, you could blemish all your animals so that no matter what, whichever one is the 10th, it won't have to be brought to Jerusalem. You could do that, but the rabbi said that would be like, you'd have to be a really kind of, I don't know, something to go to that length to make them all blemished. So there's no fine. It says here, we rely on the owners, and if one of them has a blemish, it's probably just that one got a blemish naturally, because if you really wanted to get out of it, you wouldn't take a chance that the 10th one that's blemished is the one that you just blemish them all, and then you for sure you'd be safe, and so there's no knas there. In any case,
Did blemished sheep also have a lower commercial value in addition to obviously same commercial value?
No, it's just about the altar. It's just about bringing bread as a sacrifice. Anyways, last mitzvah. Questions about Bechor Behema and Ma'aser Behema. Right, Ma'aser Behema is what we just learned about. The 10th, the tithing, the 10th of your animals. Its closest mitzvah to compare it to is Ma'aser Sheni. The last mitzvah is Reishit Hagez, the shearing of the sheep. Remember that chart I gave you? I gave you this beautiful graphic. We had all the 24 gifts to the kahuna, and inside the Beit HaMikdash, outside the Beit HaMikdash, in Jerusalem. If anybody needs one of these, you didn't get one, or you want another one, Thomas, Bavakasha, Malti, you weren't here, Bavakasha. So, shearing, the shearing, the Reshit. Is there another one you need? Okay, sure, I have it on I think I have another one. I hope I have another one. Yeah. Let's see. I only have one left. I think I only have one left, so just share. I can make you another copy later. Reshit Hagez is the last mitzvah of the 5, and we'll try to start the laws today. Do we have Chumashim for everybody here? Open up Dvarim 18, please. If you don't have a Chumash, pull it up on your phone. Dvarim 18, verse 4. What page do you have?
Hold on a second.
367.
367, thank you.
Verse 4, you said?
Yeah.
Alright, I got 365. It didn't show for me.
Reshit.
18.
Reshit. Devarim 18.
18 is 367.
Okay, Moshe, read for us.
Never mind, yeah, that is.
In English?
English?
Yeah.
The first fruits also of thy corn, of thy wine, and of thy oil, and the first of the fleece of thy sheep shalt thou give him.
Okay, that's what we're talking about. The first of,
The fleece.
right, the fleece of the sheep. Before we talked about the first, the Reshit, the first Bikurim, we said, is when you give the first of your grains and your oils and your wine. But now the first of your fleece of your sheep. And go ahead, read the next verse.
For the Lord thy God hath chosen him out of all thy tribes to stand to minister in the name of the Lord, him and his sons forever.
Okay, so this is also another one of the gifts to the Kohanim. You give him the first. How much do you give? So our tradition has a machloket that according to, from the Torah, there's no specific amount. So any little bit, you fulfill the commandment. Chachamim say 1 out of 60. Some people say it has to have the weight of 5 selas, which is enough for the Kohen to make some kind of a belt out of the fleece, which apparently was what they would do with use it for making a belt. And the Kohen, there's no kedusha. It doesn't have any holiness. You don't have to, because he wouldn't bring it. It was a tax, basically a tax to the Kohen. Yeah.
Is a seller just a measurement?
Yes, seller is a coin. About 100 grams of wool, we say. 100 grams.
100 grams of what?
Wool. 100 grams of wool is the
Is one seller
equivalent.
or 5 sellers?
5 sellers. Yeah, not a lot. It's a little bit. And again, the idea is the first should go to the Kohen, and of course, as the Torah says, to support the Kohanim, they should have clothing. We said before, maybe they should have donkeys. Maybe they should have bread. We talked about the challah. They should have produce. We spoke about that as well.
If they specifies though with the sheep.
The
So if
shearing
we
of the
have-
sheep
So if we have
specifically.
alpacas, if we have llamas, if we have anything else, that wool doesn't have to
I
be.
think not. I think
Is that
not.
from the first sheep or the first one that you?
The shearing, the first of the shearing process.
Every however many months or something.
Correct.
You do it again, so then you can more.
That's right. It's very, what story is there in the Torah about the shearing of the sheep? There's a special time. Lavan? No.
Sharing the sheep.
Was Lavan shearing his sheep? Who was shearing his sheep?
Sharing?
Shearing.
Shearing?
I don't think it talks about Yaakov.
Did he
Was
separate
Yaakov?
it?
I
Did
don't
he share?
think-
Did he separate the sheep according to the spot?
Cutting off, shearing.
Sheared like a song?
I was gonna joke that. I was gonna
Come
say-
on, you guys, you should know this. Who went to shear his sheep? No, I don't think so. Does it say that Lavan went to shear his sheep?
Yeah, it did.
Did it say?
Oh,
Yes.
No.
It said Lavan went to shear the sheep and then Yaakov
That's
left.
when Yaakov left, right? Yaakov
Right.
left, that's good. It's one example, but there's a number.
Bondi?
Yitro? I don't think it says that Yitro.
No.
Make party when he did the giver.
But it doesn't say it was shearing sheep.
How could David?
For Pesach?
One of Yaakov's sons.
Yosef?
Nope.
Yehuda. Again, he left with his friend.
That's right. Yehuda with his Canaanite friend, he went to
Yes.
shear sheep, and that's why he took a wife. And Tamar knew that he was coming, and she laid in wait for him, and she got her sort of levirate marriage from him. Yehuda and Tamar, you know that story?
Yeah.
So it's in the book. It's a good book.
I think it's the next.
You should read it.
Next
It's in this week's parsha.
verse.
It's in this week's parsha. Vayishlach. It's here.
Strange coincidences.
No, it's in Vayeshev. It's in 2 weeks. It's in Vayeshev. I don't think it's in
Next one's Yishlach.
That's this fish.
Right, Vayishlach, then comes Vayeshev. I think it's a Vayeshev. It's coming soon.
So Vayigash is in 4 weeks?
Yeah.
Hmm.
3 weeks already.
No, because Miketz comes
Miketz and then
after
Vayigash.
then Vayigash.
So Vayishlach, Vayeshev, Miketz, Vayigash. Right. It's the 4th Shabbat. It's already 3.5 weeks. Okay, back to Reshit Hagez. The first shearing, we paskin that it's only in the land of Israel. Some people say it's only D'Rabbanan, like Truman or Masro today, but most people assume like it's not produce, it's not agricultural, so maybe it's even a mitzvah d'oraita. You give it from sheep who have, that's usually what we make wool from, but not from goats or any other type, it's only sheep. And if the wool of the sheep is a special type of wool, which is very hard, not really usable, you're patur from the mitzvah, you're patur from Reshit Hagez. Some of the rules what the rabbi said, and we have to finish up. So they said you have to have at least 5 sheep, so that the sum total is the value of 12 selas. Each one has to have a value of 12 selas, which is about 200 grams. Only then are you chayav to give the first of the shearings to the Kohen.
So if you just kept sharing them before they got to 200, so
12 cells or something?
Yeah, to the 12 selas. Yeah, you'd probably be
But
patur.
how does the Torah look on all these kinds of things where you can do sort of stuff to get
In
around
general,
it?
we should not try to get around the mitzvah, only when there's a competing value, which makes it worthwhile or makes it good. If there's a good reason, then we utilize mechanisms to get around the problem. We'll talk about how to fulfill this mitzvah nowadays, tomorrow, and then we're going to move on to the last mitzvah about the trees that we said we're going to talk about, Bal Tashchit, before we get into the meat of the course about
The wool, we could certainly do
kosher
today, though.
laws. Sorry?
We could certainly do the wool today.
We could, if you raise cattle, if you raise sheep, then
Would this
there's a
be-
mitzvah, yeah, and you shear them, you have to shear them, it's for their own sake, it gets hot, it gets cumbersome.
Give them to some Bobby, make nice sweaters for the Kohen.
For the Kohen, that's right, if you could,
Anywhere?
we're gonna talk about it tomorrow.
Would this apply
Yes,